According to the Bible, Solomon's Temple, also known as the First Temple, was the Holy Temple in ancient Jerusalem, on the Temple Mount, before its destruction by Nebuchadnezzar II after the siege of Jerusalem of 587 BC. The Hebrew Bible states that the temple was constructed under Solomon, king of the United Kingdom of Israel and Judah, and that during the Kingdom of Judah, the temple was dedicated to Yahweh, and is said to have housed the Ark of the Covenant. Josephus claims that the temple was burnt 470 years, 6 months, and 10 days after it was built, though rabbinic sources state that the first temple stood for 410 years and, based on the 2nd century work Seder Olam Rabbah, place construction in 832 BCE and destruction in 422 BCE, 165 years later than secular estimates. Because of the religious sensitivities involved, and the politically volatile situation in Jerusalem, only limited archaeological surveys of the Temple Mount have been conducted. No archaeological excavations have been allowed on the Temple Mount during modern times. Therefore there is no archaeological evidence for the existence of Solomon's Temple. An ivory pomegranate mentions priests in the house of YHWH, and an inscription recording the temple's restoration under Jehoash have appeared on the antiquities market, but the authenticity of both has been challenged and they remain the subject of controversy. The temple according to the Bible. The only source of information on the first temple is the Hebrew Bible. According to the biblical sources, the temple was constructed under King Solomon, during the United Monarchy of Israel and Judah. The biblical source, 1 Kings chapter 6 verse 1, puts the date of the beginning of building the temple in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel. The conventional dates of Solomon's reign are circa 970 to 931 BCE. This puts the date of its construction in the mid-10th century BCE. Some scholars have speculated that a Jebusite sanctuary may have previously occupied the site. During the Kingdom of Judah, the temple was dedicated to Yahweh, the God of Israel, and is said to have housed the Ark of the Covenant. Rabbinic sources state that the first temple stood for 410 years and, based on the 2nd century work Seder Olam Rabbah, place construction in 832 BCE and destruction in 422 BCE, 165 years later than secular estimates. The exact location of the temple is unknown. It is believed to have been situated upon the hill which forms the site of the 1st century Second Temple and present-day Temple Mount, where the Dome of the Rock is situated. However, 2 other, slightly different sites have been proposed on this same hill. One places the stone altar at the location of the rock which is now beneath the gilded dome, with the rest of the temple to the west. The other theory places the Holy of Holies atop this rock. The temple also figures in the account of King Hezekiah, who turned Judah away from idols, when later in the same century Hezekiah is confronted with a siege by the Assyrian king Sennacherib. Hezekiah, instead of plundering the temple treasuries, now uses the temple the way it is designed to be, as a house of prayer. According to the Hebrew Bible, the temple was plundered by the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar when the Babylonians attacked Jerusalem during the brief reign of Jehoiachin c. 598, Josiah's grandson. A decade later, Nebuchadnezzar again besieged Jerusalem and after 30 months finally breached the city walls in 587 BCE, subsequently burning the temple, along with most of the city. According to Jewish tradition, the temple was destroyed on Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of Av. Architectural description in the Bible. Several temples in Mesopotamia, many in Egypt, and some of the Phoenicians are now known. The description given of Solomon's temple in the Bible is not a copy of any of these, but embodied features recognizable in all of them. Its general form is reminiscent of Egyptian sanctuaries and closely matches that of other ancient temples in the region. The detailed descriptions provided in the Tanakh are the sources for reconstructions of its appearance. Technical details are lacking, since the scribes who wrote the books were not architects or engineers. Nevertheless, the descriptions have inspired modern replicas of the temple and influenced later structures around the world. Reconstructions differ. The following is largely based on Easton's Bible Dictionary and the Jewish Encyclopedia. Most Holy Place, the Holy of Holies, or Kodesh HaKodeshim in Hebrew, also called the Inner House, was 20 cubits in length, breadth, and height. The usual explanation for the discrepancy between its height and the 30-cubit height of the temple is that its floor was elevated. Like the cellar of other ancient temples, it was floored and wainscoted with cedar of Lebanon, and its walls and floor were overlaid with gold. It contained 2 cherubim of olive wood, each 10 cubits high and each having outspread wings of 10 cubits span, so that, since they stood side by side, the wings touched the wall on either side and met in the center of the room. There was a 2-leaved door between it and the holy place overlaid with gold, also a veil of techlet, purple, and crimson and fine linen. It had no windows and was considered the dwelling place of the name of God. The color scheme of the veil was symbolic. Blue represented the heavens, while red or crimson represented the earth. Purple, a combination of the 2 colors, represents a meeting of the heavens in the earth. Hekal, the Hekal, or holy place, is also called the greater house, and the temple, the word also means palace, was of the same width and height as the Holy of Holies, but 40 cubits in length. Its walls were lined with cedar, on which were carved figures of cherubim, palm trees, and open flowers, which were overlaid with gold. Chains of gold further marked it off from the Holy of Holies. The floor of the temple was of fir wood overlaid with gold. The doorposts, of olive wood, supported folding doors of fir. The doors of the Holy of Holies were of olive wood. On both sets of doors were carved cherubim, palm trees, and flowers, all being overlaid with gold. Etymology: the Hebrew noun hekal in classical Hebrew means a large building. This can be either the main building of the temple in Jerusalem, or a palace such as the palace of Ahab, king of Samaria, or the palace of the king of Babylon. Usage: hekal is used 80 times in the Masoretic text of the Hebrew Bible. Of these, 70 refer to the house of the Lord, the other 10 are references to palaces. There is no reference to any part of the tabernacle using this term in the Hebrew Bible. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting upon a throne high and lifted up, and his train filled the Hekal. Isaiah chapter 6 verse 1. Use in architecture: the Jerusalem Temple in older English versions of the Bible, including the King James. The term temple is used to translate Hekal. In modern versions more reflective of archaeological research, the distinction is made of different sections of the whole temple. Scholars and archaeologists generally agree on the structure of Solomon's temple as described in 1 Kings chapter 6 verses 3-5, with the main building, the Hekal, in English now sometimes called the sanctuary, the Devia, the inner sanctuary, and finally the Holy of Holies. This main building of the temple is depicted on coins from the Bar Kokhba revolt. This main building was between the outer altar, where most sacrifices were performed, and inside at the far end was the entry to the Holy of Holies, originally containing the Ark of the Covenant. The main Hekal contained a number of sacred ritual objects including the 7-branched candlestick, the inner altar for incense offerings, and the table of the showbread. Synagogues: the same architectural layout of the temple was adopted in synagogues leading to the Hekal being applied in Sephardi usage to the Ashkenazi Torah Ark, the equivalent of the nave. Porch: the ULAN, or porch, acted as an entrance before the temple on the east. This was 20 cubits long and 10 cubits deep. Note that this porch was 120 cubits high. The description does not specify whether a wall separated it from the next chamber. In the porch stood the 2 pillars Jashan and Boaz, which were 18 cubits in height. Chambers were built about the temple on the southern, western and northern sides. These formed a part of the building and were used for storage. They were probably one story high at first. 2 more may have been added later. Courts. According to the Bible, 2 courts surrounded the temple. It contained the altar of burnt offering, the brazen sea lava and 10 other lavas. A brazen altar stood before the temple, its dimensions 20 cubits square and 10 cubits high. The great court surrounded the whole temple. It was here that people assembled to worship. Brazen Sea. The large basin known as the Brazen Sea measured 10 cubits wide brim to brim, 5 cubits deep and with a circumference of 30 cubits around the brim, rested on the backs of 12 oxen. The Book of Kings states that it contains 2,000 baths, while Chronicles states it can hold up to 3,000 baths and states that its purpose was to afford opportunity for the purification by immersion of the body of the priests. The lavas, each of which held 40 baths, are rested on portable holders made of bronze, provided with wheels, and ornamented with figures of lions, cherubim, and palm trees. The author of the Books of the Kings describes their minute details with great interest. Josephus reported that the vessels in the temple were composed of orichalcum in Antiquities of the Jews. According to 1 Kings chapter 7 verse 48, there stood before the Holy of Holies a golden altar of incense and a table for showbread. This table was of gold, as were also the 5 candlesticks on each side of it. The implements for the care of the candles, tongs, basins, snuffers, and fire pans, were of gold, and so were the hinges of the doors. Archaeology. Because of the religious and political sensitivities involved, no archaeological excavations and only limited surface surveys of the Temple Mount have been conducted since Charles Warren's expedition of 1867–70. There is no archaeological evidence for the existence of Solomon's Temple, and the building is not mentioned in surviving extra-biblical accounts. An ostracon, sometimes referred to as the House of Yahweh ostracon, was discovered at Tel Arad, dated to 6th century BCE, which mentions a temple which is probably the temple in Jerusalem. A thumb-sized ivory pomegranate measuring 44 mm in height, and bearing an ancient Hebrew inscription, sacred donation for the priests in the house of YHVH, was believed to have adorned a scepter used by the high priest in Solomon's temple. It was considered the most important item of biblical antiquities in the Israel Museum's collection. However, in 2004, the Israel Antiquities Authority reported the inscription to be a forgery, though the ivory pomegranate itself was dated to the 14th or 13th century BCE. This was based on the report's claim that YJTRR and sized letters in the inscription stopped short of an ancient break, as they would have if carved after the ancient break was made. Since then, it has been proven that one of the letters was indeed carved prior to the ancient break, and the status of the other 2 letters is now in question. Some paleographers and others have continued to insist that the inscription is ancient, and the authenticity of this artifact is still the object of discussion. Another artifact, the Jehoash inscription, which first came to notice in 2003, contains a 15-line description of King Jehoash's 9th century BCE restoration of the temple. Its authenticity was called into question by a report by the Israel Antiquities Authority, which said that the surface patina contained microfossils of foraminifera. As these fossils do not dissolve in water, they cannot occur in a calcium carbonate patina, leading initial investigators to conclude that the patina must be an artificial chemical mix applied to the stone by forgers. As of late 2012, the academic community is split on whether the tablet is authentic or not, commenting on a 2012 report by geologists arguing for the authenticity of the inscription. In October 2012, Herschel Shanks wrote, "The current situation was that most Hebrew language scholars believe that the inscription is a forgery and geologists that it is genuine. And thus, because we rely on experts, and because there is an apparently irresolvable conflict of experts in this case, Barr has taken no position with respect to the authenticity of the Jehoash inscription. By 2006, the Temple Mount Sifting Project had recovered numerous artifacts dating from the 8th to 7th centuries BCE from soil removed in 1999 by the Islamic Religious Trust from the Solomon Stables area of the Temple Mount. These include stone weights for weighing silver and a First Temple period bulla, or seal impression, containing ancient Hebrew writing which includes the name Netanyahu ben Yahush. Netanyahu is a name mentioned several times in the book of Jeremiah, while the name Yahush appears in the Lachish letters. However, the combination of names was unknown to scholars. In 2007, artifacts dating to the 8th to 6th centuries BCE were described as being possibly the first physical evidence of human activity at the Temple Mount. During the First Temple period, the findings included animal bones, ceramic bowl rims, bases, and body sherds, the base of a juglet used to pour oil, the handle of a small juglet, and the rim of a storage jar. Other contemporary Yahweh temples. There is archaeological and written evidence of 3 Israelite temples, either contemporary or a very close date, dedicated to Yahweh, either in the land of Israel or in Egypt. 2 of them have the same general outline as given by the Bible for the Jerusalem Temple. The Israelite Temple at Tel Arad in Judah, 10th to 8th, 7th century BCE. The Jewish Temple at Elephantine in Egypt, already standing in 525 BCE. Of a layout not yet discussed in the press is the following Israelite temple, discovered in 2012 a few kilometers west of Jerusalem. The Israelite Temple at Tel Motza, California, 750 BCE. Freemasonry. Freemasonry is a fraternal order whose origins are in the European guilds of stonemasons who built the cathedrals and castles of Europe. Rituals in Freemasonry refer to King Solomon and the building of his temple. Masonic buildings, where lodge members meet, are sometimes called temples, an allegoric reference to King Solomon's temple. Kabbalah. Kabbalah views the design of the Temple of Solomon as representative of the metaphysical world and the descending light of the Creator through. Sophie wrote of the Tree of Life. The levels of the outer, inner and priest courts represent 3 lower worlds of Kabbalah. The Boaz and Jashan pillars at the entrance of the temple represent the active and passive elements of the world of Atziluth. The original menorah and its 7 branches represent the 7 lower. Sophie wrote of the Tree of Life. The veil of the Holy of Holies and the inner part of the temple represent the veil of the abyss on the Tree of Life, behind which the Shekinah or divine presence hovers.